Today, I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Erin Guido, to get us set up for today's panel. Erin?
Thanks, Vince. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate everyone's participation in these programs. Super excited about today's talk. Really excited because a lot of artists, I think that's one of the biggest questions of, artists that are interested in public art. How do we actually build that public art? And hopefully this panel can answer some of those questions. Just want to note that, Lauren Herzak-Bauman, an amazing local artist that we've worked with on a few public art projects. Really excited that she's moderating today. She's amazing. We are really excited. She'll be asking questions of the panel, but you can also add in questions yourself. Feel free to physically raise your hand and we can just note that and call on you. Or you can add your questions in on the chat, or you can raise your hand within the Zoom chat also. So please feel free to participate. We'd love if you're able to turn on your camera so it's a little more conversational. And just wanted to very briefly, though, each panelist will introduce themselves, but just wanted to say thank you to our panelists. Along with Lauren, Martha Jackson Jarvis. So excited you're here, Martha. Thank you so much. We worked with Martha way back in 2009, I think it was, on an installation at the Harvey Bryce School on the St. Luke's campus. And I was actually an intern then, so that was one of my first public art projects that I got to work on. And Martha since then has done amazing projects before and after then. And then we have also Bruce Farkas from Signature Sign. And Bruce has completely saved Land Studio a number of times with many, many projects that we've worked with them on the fabrication. So they are amazing to work with. Both have design capabilities and fabrication capabilities. And then we have Doug and Jeremy from Graphite Design and Build, who we actually have not officially worked with, but we were, before COVID hit, working with them on a project with artist Toco Oko, an artist duo from Brazil, who maybe some of you joined us for their artist talk. So, so there's new fabricators to Land Studio, fabricators that we've worked with for a long time, artists we've worked with, and just really excited about this panel. Thanks so much. I'll hand it over to you, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Land, thanks for having me to moderate. And I'm so excited to talk to these three amazing artist fabrication teams. As Erin mentioned, I have done a few public art projects, and my background is in ceramics, but I also do sculpture, and I got into public art when I moved back to Cleveland. Sometimes I fabricate and sometimes I hand it off. So I'm really excited to hear about how all of these different fabricators work. I'm going to ask each of you to do a little bit of an introduction about yourself, and then we'll move into questions. And I just want to add, questions are so welcome. The more conversational this is, the better. I have a whole list of questions I want to ask, but you probably have better ones. So please just raise your hand or throw it in the chat and we will get to your question. So Martha, let's start with you.
Oh, well, hello everyone. Take my glasses off. I'm Martha Jackson Jarvis and I live here in Washington, DC. And I am a sculptor and I work at Jackson Jarvis Studio, and presently I collaborate with one of my daughters, Ingina Saray Jarvis. So we've been working collaboratively for a number of years now. I work in mixed media, really. I started out in ceramics, working in clay and structures, three-dimensional structures. So in the studio, I usually do two-dimensional works as well as three-dimensional works. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you. Bruce, can you introduce yourself next?
Hi, everybody. I'm Bruce Farkas. I own Signature Sign Company. We've been doing our thing for a little over 30 years. We built everything from really small, intricate kinds of signs to very large, illuminated types of things. And we're really privileged to be able to build some public art. And we've really had a great time doing that with Cleveland Public Art and then Land Studio. I got into this business by accident, and I basically started by painting murals and then hand painting signs, and traveling around the country for a couple of years on a motorcycle, going from town to town, painting signs, and one thing led to another. And here we are.
It sounds like a pretty good accident.
It worked out.
Thank you. Jeremy or Doug? I'm not sure which one of you wants to do your introduction.
Well, Jeremy, as you can see, is on an installation at a elementary school. We're putting in some kind of cartoony trees in the background right there in a little library. But I'm at the shop. We're Graphite Design and Build. We've been in Toledo, Ohio, in this location for about 9 years. And Jeremy and I met 10 years before that, doing something very similar to what we do now, which is a lot of like museum installations, a lot of sculpture, occasionally two-dimensional stuff. But when it comes down to it, we're both sculptors, we're painters, we're engineers, we're fabricators. So material-wise, we use pretty much anything you can imagine to make three-dimensional shapes. And we have a library of chemicals and materials, and we pretty much sometimes pretend we're architects, sometimes we pretend we're engineers, but mostly sculptors and painters. Yeah. And we are working on some public art right now. So hopefully we work together with Land once this pandemic passes. So.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you. Okay, well, Martha, I want to come back to you to start. So you have, I mean, what I think is really interesting about this panel is that we have artists and fabricators and then artists and fabricators. So when it seems like you do not fabricate all of your work, it seems like there might be elements that you need to outsource. So how did you nurture those relationships, or how did you find a fabricator?
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. I fabricate much of the work, but I absolutely depend on outside fabricators. And I have to say that those are relationships that you end up building over the years. And it's been really important that part of the work system for me is to almost gather the kind of human resources that you need to realize a project. So over the years, once I find a fabricator, an artist, and usually that starts from conversations, word of mouth, talking to other artists to see maybe what's been done. And as most artists, just like Doug articulated, you end up working in multiple materials, learning these materials. Really know their materials and basically love their materials, and that they have a storehouse of information, materials, and access to contemporary ways of working. So it's really a discourse, and usually when I find a fabricator or installer, these are people that I hold on to dearly, because these are relationships that become really paramount. And the more that you can work with someone, you develop a rapport, right? Not just a personal rapport, but a rapport in terms of ideas and thinking and construction and how things may work. So I look for people who can really, who are really interested in the art. And basically you have to be interested sort of in what I'm doing, my thinking, and we communicate. I go in with an open mind, but I go in with ideas and I go in with direction. And then I'm expecting from that fabricator almost a call and response, because I'm relying on the fabricator for expertise that I don't have. But at the same time, I'm bringing to that fabricator certain ideas that must be realized and certain integrity of my ideas kept.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it sounds like, you've nurtured these like long relationships. So I'm curious, like, has anyone new entered the fold, and how has that worked out?
Oh yeah, the new people who enter, and it's like life, it's always this turning over, this churning that happens. So, and I'm always, as in studio work, you're always exploring and investigating new ideas and directions. Mm-hmm. So that calls upon, kind of new directions and reaching out in many ways. So recently I've kind of shifted from another fabricator that I was working with in Maryland, and now one in Philadelphia. And it's just really interesting. The new fabricator is younger. My old fabricator was really a traditional, almost blacksmith tradition, which I loved. I love the tinkering quality, the hand craftsman. I am myself from a crafts kind of legacy, working with clay and materials like that. So that sort of ingenuity and really being involved in the science of what they do and the materials was really important. And I recently have, experienced it with a younger fabricator, and he's young but energetic, and his whole life is built around fabrication. And that's the kind of resource you want. When you visit his shop, it's just an endless array of what these machines, I mean, I can spend all day just like seeing what these machines do and how you do it. And you feel this kind of excitement, and really knowledge, and that this person is like a living laboratory. He's always researching something new, some new equipment. He's like calling you in the middle of the night, I got a new this and that, and I'm ready to do something different. I'm looking for that kind of energy.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I love hearing you like talk about it as like friendships and collaborations. That's like just beautiful. Bruce, I want to ask you a couple of questions. Seeing as you have like more of the role of the fabricator, how do you negotiate with artists, and how do you think artists can better prepare themselves or, kind of approach fabricators? What do you like to see from the artist?
Well, we need to be able to understand their vision, and whether that's a mental sketch or something that's more thought out than that. We try to get a really good understanding of what they want the art piece to be. And really, our goal is really to make that vision come to life. So if they have a drawing or a series of drawings and they have an idea about the scale and what they want to achieve, one of the best things that we do is when we bring the artist into our shop, and you can stand there and have materials and talk about the piece and discuss what materials might be best, what processes might work best. So it's really a collaborative kind of a thing, but our focus is really not really for us to impart anything other than our fabrication expertise to the process. Mm-hmm. We really think that it's really most important for us to really focus on the artist's vision and try to nail it.
Yeah. Well, so with that said, when we get to the end of the project, do you feel like it's important for the artist to name you when they're, like that acknowledgement, is that important to you?
That's a good question. I don't think that we care so much about that. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we're acknowledged, I think that's great. the guys in the shop, the fabricators, everybody's proud about the work that they do, and they're really invested in it. But I think that's the artist's choice. So yeah.
Yeah, can I say something? That's an interesting question, about the credits. I don't know. I've worked on any number of projects that at the end of it, as an artist, I barely get any mentions, that there's many things, there are no signs or in public space saying this artist did that. I'm always careful to make sure that there's some in my writing about the piece or the kind of historical documentation that I take for my studio and myself, that it's important to say, who the fabricator is.
I agree with you.
Important about that. I totally respect, to hear the fabricator talk, that it's just, I don't know. I work with fabricators that I work with more often. And then I've worked with some that I'm just, say, a project in Seattle, Washington. I live in Washington, D.C., so that's all the way across the country. So it was really interesting to find a fabricator there, and I worked with FS. Excellent fabricators. And I just remember, and they were really a big firm, but I was determined to work with them because I'd seen so much of their work that was beautiful. And of course, you have to gauge how much of a budget you have to work with certain fabricators. Mm-hmm. So I try to come up with, at least for me, I think three-dimensionally. So I usually end up making like models, cardboard out of objects so that I can articulate an idea for myself. And the first thing I think about, and you mentioned, was scale. You have to know scale and what you're seeing and what you envision, and then how to impart that. And I just, out of this cardboard, I remember going in Seattle to meet with in their shop to meet with the fabricators. And I just opened my bag and I pulled out maybe 7 of these different forms that I have built, and, just started the dialogue. And it was so interesting, the fabricators saying, oh, well, that's interesting. How can we build it? And then finally he looked at the model and said, well, we build it basically the way that you kind of put this together. Mm-hmm. So there's something about thinking three-dimensionally. Yeah. And then at the end of our session, he thanked me for not coming in with a drawing on a napkin.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's amazing that you two were able to work through that process together. I know I asked you that question, Bruce, because I would have been lost without my fabricator's help on several projects. I rely on some projects, I rely pretty heavily on my fabricator to help me work through some of the things I don't understand. I tried to bring more than a sketch on a napkin, as Martha did. Doug, I want to ask you a few questions. You have this interesting kind of in-between point where you're like a one-stop shop. You can design, your artists, you fabricate. What situations have you been in where you have to take it outside of your group of people, out of your shop? Can you give us a specific, how did you find those people? Can you give us a specific example of when that's happened?
Yeah, again, it's just building relationships over the course of 10, 20 years. So like when we just recently did a museum, a natural history museum, and we had hired 25 artists. So we actually were able to pull even more people into our shop, and we're all working together for a year and a half. We had 4 muralists, maybe 5 or 6 sculptors, a sculptor from Cleveland that we actually paid for her to stay here for a year and a half, half of the week. So that's how insane it was for a while. But then like, as even though with that many sculptors, some of the things we sculpted in maquette form, like little models. And while we were sculpting the rest of the things, had them sent out to a company that we met years ago in the Dayton area to have them scanned. And then another company in Louisville was simultaneously printing them out in giant, large scale, like woolly mammoth type stuff.
Wow.
So having to kind of multitask by sending things out, even though we've upped our staff to like 25 people. And then occasionally, like if something's massive, it's outside, it's so big that people can get hurt on it, we have to bring outside consultants in to make sure our guessing at being engineers is correct. And a lot of times engineers will come in and look at our metal structure and just say, oh, that's pretty good. And we're just kind of guessing, but luckily we still get the stamp in the end. So
yeah, I think that's the scariest part for me as an artist with like no engineering skills, is how to bring in an engineer to the project. And sometimes the fabricator has been able to do that for me. And then sometimes I still have to get a stamp from a city that I'm working with. So yeah, that's, that's nice to hear. Like, it's nice reassurance when you know that you're like on the right path.
Oh yeah, yeah. A lot of guessing, I think, and then maybe asking for forgiveness sometimes.
Yeah, right.
It's interesting that a lot of what we build, and when we build some very big things, a lot of what we build and how we build it and what we use really comes from experience. There is no engineer here.
Mm-hmm.
We have an engineer that we work with closely, but typically we'll select the size of pipe and sheet and tube and angle and all of those things, and whatever the mounting is going to be, and the size of the bolts, and if it's going in the ground, the concrete and the footer and all of that stuff. And we'll give it to our engineer, and really just from experience, 99 times out of 100, the engineer will do the calcs and they'll stamp what we submitted to them.
Right, I think it starts with guessing and then becomes experience. At some point, you go, I am a professional, I guess. Yeah.
Right.
So a question to all three of you. I would imagine that maybe some people who are listening today might hear us talking about some of these terms and just maybe thinking like, I don't even know, this is like overwhelming. How would I even get into public art? So like, what would be some advice you would give to artists who maybe want to work on bigger projects and apply for public art things? What kind of skills do you think it would be important for them to have in order to work with a fabricator?
Well, maybe a good place to start is in your community arts organization, the commissions on the arts and humanities, land projects like that. I just think they're invaluable gateways that they create for artists, and you start out, I think Doug's expression of like guessing, and then it turns into expertise. And for all of us, you have to enter somewhere. You have to find a place to enter. And you begin. And with that beginning is, a lot of research, investigation. It takes courage. You're doing something that's unknown. It's new territory. But I think now there are lots of avenues and points of entry for artists if you're interested. And then again, you're constantly weighing what your vision is, It isn't just making it big. It has to still, work in space, and all those design issues have to still be addressed. But I think, just beginning, and applying the things that you do know as an artist, and applying those, that expertise that you have as an artist, and just be brave enough to explore, because it is kind of new ground, and it's ever changing. It doesn't stay the same. I mean, you see public space and it's here today and gone tomorrow, or changed. And I mean, I've been working long enough to see them put up sculpture, tear it down, tear the whole building down, change the whole block, and then start over again. So that's the rubric that you're working within. It's not studio work, it's not your personal studio. It's public space.
Yeah,
So.
that's beautiful. Doug or Bruce, any thoughts on some advice you'd offer up to new artists?
I think Martha hit most of it on the head there, but I guess illustrate your ideas pretty well. And I always go back to models, even if it's a two-dimensional thing, building a model of the wall or the space, getting a sense of scale, but even a crude model, because a lot of times people have a hard time understanding the idea just in drawing or just in text. So I almost every time we build a model, people just seem to get it right away because they can experience it, walk around it, look at it. So
Yeah.
I think, Doug, you're right on there. I have to remember when I first started out trying to get public projects, and I would do drawings, and we would do drawings and have all these elaborate things, and people never got it. But the moment I did a three-dimensional model, they got it. You can talk about it, people can envision it. As artists, you can look at a drawing and you can translate it, you can think about it in some complex ways. Most people cannot. You know, they're into the written word on a page, or 8-by sheet of paper. They can't interpret. And not until, and of course, Photoshop helped, because I could take my image and put it in a space right in front of their face. So you have to make it real for people. You have to understand how your viewer will experience your idea, because it's never going to live if you can't sell the idea. And that's a tough thing to do.
Agreed.
I think you guys are right on. I think those are great points. I think really modeling is really, really important. It's interesting that most often, at least in our experience, we haven't had a model to work with, and more often than not, it's been, a drawing on paper, and then it starts to build from there. But doing a model is really a great thing. And the other thing is to, find a fabricator that, has a kind of a welcoming environment and really makes you feel at home and really gets invested in your piece and in your work. You should really be able to feel comfortable going into the shop and feeling like your work is really paramount. So that's,
I think that's such a good point, because there is so much negotiation that happens. And if you don't feel comfortable asking questions, the work just isn't going to get made in the way that it needs to get made. I mean, I would say if I was going to add any advice, it would be to just get really comfortable asking a lot of questions so that you make sure you understand and you're able to communicate to whoever you need to what's happening in the fabrication process. And don't be scared to put your, keep your vision at the forefront. The design and the fabrication have to marry and come together, for safety and to get so the piece can get made. We have a couple questions.
One big thing real quick though is keeping your eye on it, working with the fabricator and making sure it doesn't get value engineered down. Because a lot of times budgets and vision, I guess that's another thing to keep in mind too, is the budget with the vision and building to the budget so that it can't be value engineered, because that is such a disappointing thing. If things start getting cut without control, then it ends up not being the thing you wanted. So it's about working with the fabricator to find a way to get it to what you want within a certain budget.
Yeah, very, very, very good point.
Yeah, well.
Martha, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, just how important what Doug has said, the budget, that's critical. I know I'm always a little peeved when in the prospectus, many times the architects now are doing these elaborate proposals and they have all this work that they've collected from all over the internet and all over the world, and they're mega projects, they look beautiful. And then the budget will be something low, and they are showing 7 $500,000 projects. And it's a distortion for the community that you have to work with. I don't know if that made any sense. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep, it's weird too, because the foundation for the outdoor public sculpture could have a $150,000 budget, but then when it comes to the art, it always ends up being the last thing to come through, and it seems to have the smallest budget. So
Yeah.
fighting for a bigger budget, and then also working through how to make it have the most impact with the financial value that's been allotted to it.
How do you negotiate larger budgets?
Well, that's hard to do. The thing is, I think it's important sometimes if it's not directly negotiating the budget, it is get in on the project as early as possible. And then the possibilities for more budget and being an integral part of what's being built. And the importance of your presence makes sense, and they will fund it. So I find the earlier I can get in and put my vision in and have the buy-in, then you have a much better opportunity. Not saying that you can all the time, but to speak on what the budget is, or link it to a realistic budget. Everyone else in that project is being paid. No one's working for free, and artists must remember that. So we have to, it is a balancing act, very much so, because you want the best art piece that you can. You want to pay, this is the other thing that's very important to me. I pay all of my contractors, subcontractors up front. Never cut anyone out. That is so critical. If I'm working hard, my fabricator is going to be paid up front, and I move forward. That's the only way to have a relationship. So you're not just working for yourself, you're working for all these people who have believed in your idea. So I really go to bat, and I make the people believe that this is an important venture. We're working to the limit of what we can produce, and these people have to be paid. And you have to go in like that.
Yeah, I love it. I love your, that's a great attitude to have. And that advice about getting in early on is so good. We have someone who wants to ask a question. Jillian, would you like to unmute and ask a question?
Sure, yeah. I am kind of the middleman in this process. I work at a botanical garden, the Cleveland Botanical Garden and the Holden Arboretum. And oftentimes, we will have a bigger project with some art piece, or maybe it's just simply an art piece that we want to have done. And I've been doing this a long time, working in exhibits. And I just wanted to get maybe some advice from some of the fabricators, because I always feel awful that I have to get at least 3 quotes from every fabricator up front. I never really know what the process is, what the final budget is going to be. And it's just sort of like, here, tell me how much you could make this for, without any sort of commitment. Are fabricators used to that? Just having to kind of make up numbers on the fly, and knowing that they may never hear from that person again. I guess I just want to, how can I approach that so I don't feel so guilty just getting prices and then walking away?
Happens.
Well, if you've got a design, Jillian, and you're giving that same design to 3 fabricators, that's legit, and that's to be expected. And you'll get 3 quotes from 3 different fabricators if you have a design and at least some general specs. The only problem that comes in that might come in is when there's design work to be done. So there've been, a lot of occasions where we've done a fair amount of design work, and then things kind of go out to bid, and it's kind of, amorphous. And so it doesn't happen often, but sometimes there's occasions where we have an in-house design team, and our work kind of gets our design work. sort of ends up getting used sometimes, and people kind of bid on stuff that, that we've designed. Doesn't happen much, but that's the nature of the beast, to go out and get, 3 quotes, and I think everybody's used to that. So I don't think that you should feel bad.
Would you
Just
mind
be
if
upfront about it, I guess, maybe.
I just have a follow-up to what you were just saying, Bruce. I think that there's sometimes Land Studio or an artist is in this predicament where there is, the artist has been selected to develop a proposal, but they haven't been 100% selected for the project. So maybe they're going against like maybe 3 artists. And so they need to do some design work to show that they can do the project that they are proposing within budget and things. And I was just wondering, maybe depends how much work and things, but how from your perspective, are you willing to do some design work then without the 100% guarantee that you're going to get the project, not maybe because the artist wouldn't select you, but because the artist might not get that selected, like that in between where they're trying to propose something? Could you talk a little bit about that process?
Are you directing that at me, Erin?
I think you, or honestly, any 3 of you, because I'm sure you may have all been in that position.
Nothing stifles the creative process like an upfront contract. So, I mean, we, like Bruce is saying, we have done a lot of design work ahead of time just to get the ideas flowing, almost to get the job to exist. And then a lot of times, I'm not going to say half, it kind of fizzles out, or maybe goes away for a couple years and then comes back. It's not too often that I've seen our designs end up getting used. Sometimes after the fact, we'll do one project and then maybe that client will use that same information to do it again. But it sort of is the nature of the beast where you have to get the ball rolling, and maybe they don't like what you've come up with. And then that's when they step away. And I think it's kind of rare that we send bills out to sort of failed projects. Not to say that those happen that often. Usually it's a positive ending, but there is we have spent a lot of time doing early sketches and design work, and it sometimes takes a long time to build, but it is sort of a gray area.
Right.
I think the last thing you want to do is demand upfront payment in a situation like this. It's a very touchy subject. How do you guys feel about that?
This might be a little different, but still, the nature of the beast. I like that statement, because in working, I compete for a lot of projects, and you certainly don't get all of them, that's for sure. But for many, and now, the larger ones and the really complex ones, you really have to almost design it to even talk about it. You can't even have a real conversation about it unless you've done a tremendous amount of work, design work and thinking and drawing and documentation. And I'm finding more and more I'm called upon to do that. And I think, as Doug has said, sometimes, and then they go away, you're part of the final 3, and then months go by and all this work, and you're working on a fever pitch and your ideas are really cranking, and then they go away. But sometimes 5 years later, 8 years later, they call you. So it's the nature of the beast. You're constantly putting out, and sometimes you get back, and then sometimes you don't. But even when I don't, I have that work and those ideas in my storehouse of ideas and studio work, and almost never that all the ideas are lost, because somewhere down the road, I can maybe rethink, repurpose. It's part of the vocabulary, but who can afford to do that a lot? I can't. So that's the catch-22, right?
Yeah.
Or the nature of the beast. But you have to do a lot of work that you don't get paid for.
Right. If I can just add one little point, with respect to like Cleveland Botanical Garden, if let's say in a perfect world, you'd go out for 3 designs and get 3 bids. And then you would be at once selecting a design and a fabricator. In another world, in a perfect world, you would go out and hire someone to do the design work, come to a conclusion on that, and then give it to 3 fabricators, and then you get your 3 prices back. So did that make any sense? That those that dichotomy
At least with that second scenario, you get an apples to apples. The first scenario, if it's 3 different designs, 3 different fabricators.
Exactly. Right.
It could be 3 completely different projects, different scales and stuff. So.
Right. And look at, in yet another perfect world, there's design build. Well, if you have relationships with fabricators, or if you have relationships with organizations and you've built this trust over time, then you hire them, you work through the design, and you trust that their pricing is fair, and go on from there.
Yeah.
That's a good situation to be in.
That sounds like the best scenario to me. And again, it gets back to that trust that you build with the artisans. I spent some time in Italy, and I was so respect their idea of like the artisan, the craftsman, the master person who's dedicated their life. So the best scenario is to build a relationship and be able to trust that you are getting the best work and the best prices for your ideas. And to me, that's invaluable when you can have that kind of rapport, professional rapport.
Bruce, if I could just say something, there's I can think of a couple situations where the idealized scenario that you just presented of like the design is complete and then it's put out to bid. Could you comment on some situations where an artist has come to you with a completely unbuildable idea and you have worked with them to revise the design?
Well, we either do that or we throw them out. No, there's a process. There's no question. I remember the work that we did for Cleveland Public Art's original location was probably, I think, my favorite piece. And it was, I forget the name of the guy that designed it, but there was an evolution to that process and the materials that we were going to use that involved double laminated color embedded glass, which is incredibly heavy. And we typically work in aluminum, so there was the size of the aluminum. We actually made, in the shop, some samples, which is pretty common for us. And there was a learning curve there, and he was deeply involved in that and came back into the shop, and he was with us as we experimented with different materials and sizes. So it was a real collaborative process.
I want to jump back to a question that came up in the chat. This is from Deborah. Can you talk about some typical touch points where artist and fabricator have to touch base on any problems or modifications? Or I think Deborah wants to know how often an artist should be expecting to have contact with the fabricator to make sure everything is proceeding okay.
I think that in the beginning is the information dump. So getting everyone on the same page, having the models, doing the samples, trial and error, figuring out the best path forward. So getting as much of that, the information and the collaboration in the beginning. And then I think once it's airborne, it's more about hitting milestones. So at that point, there's the colors figured out, the materials figured out, the scales figured out. At that point, it's just when we get to this point, check in, because nothing's going to be shocking. You just want to make sure it's going along. So then I think it becomes like a milestone. And I don't think everything's the same. It's probably once it's fabricated, before it's painted, once it's painted, and then just before it ships or something like that. So information dump in the beginning and then milestones to the end. That's how I would proceed.
Yeah, I think that's it. Information dump at the beginning, and then in the milestones, what's really important, I just get photographs, a million different images along the way of some of the process is always helpful for me. I like that, to see, the metal when it's just being fabricated. I love seeing some of the apparatus of how things are built and constructed around it. There's something really, for me, that's quite marvelous about the process. So I like images along the way from the shop, if possible, and it's not intrusive. It's just, at the rhythm of the fabricator. But that's from, again, dialogue to know that I'm interested in this. So you send me a shot of something as it's happening in the studio and the shop. And to me, that's important. And historically, in terms of the work, it's important. And again, when we go back to the nature of credit for artists fabricated, that's still part of the history of the piece, and documentation that I think is critical along the way. So those milestones are really important to have documented along the way, because it lays the narrative, the real narrative of the piece, the birth of the piece, which is happening in the shop. And then for me, oftentimes it's in the shop, and then parts of it may have to be shipped back down to my studio, and then I'm inlaying some glass or stone or something has to happen. And then, then I see the fabricator again when some other piece arrives and it has to go on site. So there's a orchestrated ballet that happens.
I'd add that the touch points for the artist might be different than the touch points for the fabricator. So like a lot of the check-in points for the artist probably have to do with the organization that's administering the project. In terms of releasing more money for the project to continue. So there might be there's not always like a really clear path through that. So you kind of have to just make sure there's a lot of communication on what kind of check-in you need and when.
Well, in terms of payment, that should be worked out when you do that information dump.
Well, no, yeah, true. But if you're working on a project and the organization administering it is, it's like a 50-30-20, right? There just might be different points that you need to check in on. We have another question from Black Monuments that I think is a really fabulous question. Are there any technology innovations or materials or processes that you are all excited about or that you see emerging? Nope.
Graphite design and build, we're kind of old school. So we do some CAD work. We do a lot of SketchUp. But for the most part, we're playing with clay. We're playing with models, plastic. So drawing on paper. We are interested in the digital world. But right now, I think that we outsource a lot of that. Like I said, we have some maquettes scanned in the past and then digitally printed up. But when it comes down to it here at Graphite, we do like the older methods of sculpting with the clay, and it's just easier to make changes and things like that. But we are going to invest in the digital future in one way or another. So,
well, I think that the digital future certainly is here. So am I excited about it? Again, it's a turning point I see in terms of just recently using animation, adding it in. It's a bell and whistle, I'm sorry. It just is, and people respond to these things. But, I'm kind of old school too. Model, drawing, clay, bottle, stone, a chisel. But nothing attracts more than just an animation. I mean, I went recently for a competition and I came in with the model that I had built. This was some time ago. And in walks an architect. So this is another story that's happening. You're not just competing with visual artists, you're competing with architects. And he came in, opened up the computer, and a complete animation appeared, and the whole structure was constructed in front of your eyes. So tough to compete with, but this is a competitive market.
It is.
I see that it's extraordinary. I would just like to really be able to use it wisely and use it well. So I'm exploring that, and for me, it's, I have recently I had a project ceiling piece that I had done because it was tough to model. And, it's working, but, I don't like things to look superficial in some way. So I have to find a way to ground it more to my identity, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
For us, there's an awful lot of handwork in metal fabrication that goes on, and there's part of me that just philosophically likes that. We'll have CNC, we have our CNC router table, and we'll cut out whatever we need to. A lot of the stuff that we build out of aluminum will be hand fabricated. There are occasions where if a return is too big, it really can't be hand fabricated, and then you need to use computerized brakes. There were certain circumstances where we started experimenting with a combination of high density urethane, aluminum, and then finishing it with a concrete coating, which that's the way we ended up making this Cleveland script type sign for the state of Ohio. It couldn't have been hand bent really. The Cleveland script signs, those are all CAD cut faces and backs, and then the returns are hand fabbed. And there's something that's, really nice about that. In the course of our doing those, we came up with this combination, speaking of new things, that incorporates acrylic polyurethane epoxy paint with a truck bed liner. And so that ended up being a finish that we ended up redoing those in. And that was new for us.
Yeah.
What happened with the truck bed liner? What? That sounds fabulous.
We combined acrylic polyurethane catalytic epoxy paint with truck bed liner, so you can saturate the color and then spray apply it to your piece, and you can get pretty much any texture from very smooth to very textured. You can control that. And so it's been more, because people climb on these script signs, the folks that are local know that all the time. It's been a more durable finish than just the epoxy paint by itself.
Wow, that sounds fabulous.
Yeah, it does. We are at the end of our hour, so I'm going to hand it back over to Vince. And I just want to say thank you to the three panelists for entertaining my questions and sharing your process with us.
You were great. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Awesome.
Yes, thanks everyone.
Okay, I got to get the address of all these fabricators.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna work on that. That came up in the chat a lot about having a list of fabricators. And we're lucky in Cleveland. We have a lot of great we have a lot of great fabricators here.
Oh, I'd love to have the information.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll see you down the road, Doug.
Yeah, Martha.
Okay.
And
Thank
Bruce.
you, Martha. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks,
Take care, guys.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and please like look at the Studio to the Street website. It was studiotothestreet.org, and information about our future sessions. And it's great to see all of you in the audience today. And Martha, it's wonderful to see you after so many years. And,
Oh, Vince, it's wonderful to see you.
yeah.
You haven't aged a day.
Oh, I certainly have. So, well, thanks everyone, and Bruce and Doug.
Take
It's
care, guys.
really been great to have you today.
And thank you so much. Just want to add, thank you so much for asking questions, everyone participating. There's one more session before the end of the year on December 8th with we're doing a studio visit with 2 artists. So just look out for that. We'll start promoting it, and you can register one more, and then we're going to bring these back up a couple more after the new year. So just wanted to highlight that. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Doug, Bruce, and Martha. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.